Good morning. It's Wednesday the 19th of February. You're tuned in to our 10 a.m. newscast coming to you from ARIRANG's news centre in Seoul. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. As authorities begin investigating the cause of Monday's building collapse in Korea's southeast that killed 10 people, their focus is on the poor construction of the collapsed auditorium and lax management of the facilities. At least 18 people, including several police officers, have been killed in the Ukrainian capital Kiev as protesters and security forces clash in the worst violence since anti-government protests began 12 weeks ago. Plus, Korea's short-track speed skating team wins gold in the women's 3,000-metre relay in Sochi. Team Korea now stands 15th in the overall medal rankings. We start with the aftermath of this week's tragic building collapse in Korea's southeastern city of Gyeongju. Local authorities launching a probe into the exact cause of the collapse say they're focusing on poor construction and lax management of the facilities. Ji reports.
It only took about 10 seconds for the roof of an auditorium at a resort hotel in the city of Gyeongju to collapse on Monday night. Some 560 students from the Busan University of Foreign Studies were in the middle of an orientation event for the freshman class when the ceiling started to crumble above a stage setup in the front. 10 people have been confirmed dead and more than 100 injured, with 2 people in critical condition.
Everyone was sitting comfortably on the ground, but then everyone was heading to the exits all at once, and it was total chaos.
As for what caused the collapse, the area had received a record level of snow over the past week, and the snow that had piled up on the roof was estimated to weigh nearly 150 tons. The building was huge at 900 square meters, but had no pillars to support the roof. Compounding matters, the ceiling and outer walls of the auditorium were made of sandwich panels, which are usually used to build temporary structures or storage spaces. Sandwich panels are made out of thin steel plates filled with styrofoam and are known to easily absorb moisture. Even though the snow seems likely to be the primary culprit, many experts are pointing to the weakness of the building structure as the main factor behind the collapse. The government and the police have launched an investigation into how the building was constructed to determine whether the auditorium was up to code or built shoddily. President Park Geunhye, during a cabinet meeting Tuesday morning, expressed grief over the tragic incident and offered her condolences to the victims' families. She also ordered a thorough investigation into the cause of the accident. Ji, ARIRANG News.
Japan wants to hold high-level talks with Korea to sweeten soured ties, which have plunged to fresh lows in recent weeks. Tokyo's request comes ahead of US President Barack Obama's visit to Asia in April, but with historical and territorial disputes still at the fore, the prospects don't look very good. Yulian reports.
Korea-Japan relations, which remain strained due to territorial and historical disputes, took a dive in December when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine, a shrine that honors World War II-era war criminals. In an aim to break over 2 months of silence and mend ties, Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida at a news conference on Tuesday expressed a will to meet with his South Korean counterpart Yoon Byung-se. He emphasized the importance of trilateral cooperation between Japan, the United States, and South Korea in the face of the threats posed by North Korea. Kishida had already conveyed hopes for high-level talks when he met with Korea's second Vice Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol last month in Switzerland on the sidelines of an international conference. The new call for talks comes ahead of U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Asia this April. Earlier this month, at a meeting in Washington, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urged Kishida and Japan to improve relations with Korea ahead of President Obama's visit. High-level talks do not seem imminent, however, as there's been no resolution to speak of on the historical disputes that divide Korea and Japan. Japan has yet to offer compensation to the so-called comfort women who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during the Second World War. And this Saturday, Japan will hold a controversial event stressing its claim to Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo, or Takeshima as they are called in Japan, despite Seoul's repeated calls to scrap the event. Yuri-an, ARIRANG News.
And in an apparent bid by Japan to improve ties with Korea, senior officials from the two countries have met for the first time since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's war shrine visit, meeting his visiting Japanese counterpart Junichi Ihara on Tuesday. The Korean Foreign Ministry's Northeast Asian Affairs Bureau Director General Lee Sang-dok said Tokyo's false understanding of history and provocative remarks are hampering bilateral ties. He also urged Tokyo to cancel an event this weekend to mark Japan's claims to Korea's Dokdo Island. Ihara is reported to have emphasized the need to improve relations and suggested more high-level talks in the future. Strongly criticizing Tokyo's planned Dokdo event, Seoul's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Jo Tae-yong, said the content of any meeting between the two sides is what matters the most. President Park Geunhye sat down for talks with US lawmakers on Tuesday and used the opportunity to highlight the unresolved issues surrounding Japan's use of sex slaves during World War II. Meeting a group led by US House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce, the president said just 55 of Korea's sexual slavery victims, better known as comfort women, remain alive today. President Park thanked Royce for taking the lead in Congress in support of Korea's efforts to resolve historical issues with Japan and for visiting a Comfort Women Memorial in Glendale, California. Representative Royce expressed support for President Park's vision for reunification with North Korea, saying it would pave the way to provide new opportunities for the North Korean people. More than 80 South Koreans will finally get to see their loved ones for the first time in over 60 years, as the two Koreas are about to hold some very long overdue family reunions. Hwang Sang-hee shows us how the 6-day event will be organized.
War-separated family members from the two Koreas will meet with their loved ones Thursday for the first time in over 6 decades. The reunion event for families separated since the Korean War, the first in more than 3 years, will take place from February 20th through the 25th at North Korea's Mount Kumgang. 83 South Korean divided family members will gather in Sokcho, Gangwon-do province on Wednesday and spend a night there before crossing the inter-Korean border on Thursday morning. The elderly participants, most in their 80s and some in their 90s, will undergo a simple health checkup the night before their departure and receive instructions about how to conduct themselves in the communist states. On Thursday, they will travel by bus to the Mount Kumgang Resort, the site of the reunions. Here, the South Korean family members will be joined by 180 North Korean participants for the first round of reunions that runs for 3 days. The event will be composed of 6 total meetings, with the first 5 lasting for 2 hours each. The final meeting on Saturday will last just 1 hour. If the reunion event goes as planned, the separated family members have only 11 hours to make up for lost time. Millions of Koreans were separated from their families during the Korean War, and around 70,000 registered divided family members in the South are waiting to reunite with their long-lost relatives. With no telephone or letter exchanges allowed between citizens of the two Koreas, the occasional government-arranged reunions are the only chance they have. The humanitarian event is also an important barometer of inter-Korean relations. Just last September, the North called off a round of reunions amid heightening tensions on the Korean peninsula, disappointing hundreds of divided families on both sides of the border. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Now, 2 of the individuals believed to have been behind the largest personal information leak in South Korea's history were hauled up in front of lawmakers at the National Assembly on Tuesday. Ji Myung-gil has the details.
It was the biggest data breach in Korean history, with millions of people affected. At a hearing on Tuesday, lawmakers heard testimony from the two main suspects in the case, an employee at the Korea Credit Bureau, a ratings agency who is accused of stealing the personal information of more than 100 million people from bank and credit card firms in recent months. He is suspected of selling the information to an advertising agency executive for 23 million won, or a little less than $22,000.
It was purely spontaneous and I did it for personal reasons. I didn't give the data to a broker.
The majority of the 24-person committee said the man should be indicted for perjury. Both men, if convicted, could face up to 10 years in prison or a fine of up to $500,000. Lawmakers also presented evidence from their own investigations. One lawmaker presented evidence that a foreign broker had traded Korean client information with a Korean broker. Another lawmaker on the committee said he had never used a KB Kookmin credit card, but that his personal information has still been stolen. He had traced the leak to a single transaction made 20 years ago at a KB Kookmin bank. He said there should be laws imposing harsher punishments on firms that do not control the way client data is shared among institutions and their affiliates. Finance Minister Hyun Ho-seok said the government is doing all it can to prevent additional leaks in the future.
We are planning to thoroughly overhaul the way we penalize companies that are responsible for data breaches. We are also working with other government bodies on related legislation.
The government is also planning to impose hefty fines of up to 1% of a company's total sales if they are subject to future data breaches. CEOs from the three credit card firms KB Kookmin, Lotte and Nongyup, from which the personal data of up to 20 million Koreans was leaked last month, said they had strengthened monitoring of their employees and established new policies to better control the sharing of customer information between affiliates. Kim Young-gyun, ARIRANG News.
Violence has returned to Ukraine, where at least 18 people have been killed during clashes between anti-government protesters and riot police in the capital, Kiev. It's by far the worst violence seen in the city since the mass protests erupted 3 months ago. Shin Se-min reports.
The capital of Ukraine is as bloody as it can get. Clashes between riot police and protesters have resulted in the death of at least 18 people in the worst outbreak of violence since demonstrations erupted against President Viktor Yanukovich 12 weeks ago. Ukrainian police say 11 civilians and 7 policemen died as the authorities used rubber bullets, smoke, and stun grenades on protesters and clashed with civilians on the barricades surrounding the capital's Independence Square. Earlier Tuesday, the authorities had set protesters an early evening deadline that ended hours ago to end street disorders or face tough measures. The demonstrators responded by throwing patrol bombs, fireworks, and stones at police. Opposition leader Vitaly Klitschko, who is due to meet Yanukovych for emergency talks, had told women and children to quit the encampment and leave the central square, but he urged some 25,000 protesters to defend the camp, saying that they were there to stay. Tuesday's clashes began after the demonstrators attempted to march on parliament, demanding constitutional reform.
Unfortunately, there seems to be no progress being made regarding the matter. We have proposed constitutional amendment, which hasn't even submitted the reform.
President Yanukovych is expected to address the nation after his meeting with opposition leaders, but an exact time has not been announced. The international community has called on both sides to show restraint, with the U.S. saying that it was appalled by the violence. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
At least 4 people have been killed and dozens injured in Thailand as police began clearing demonstrators from protest sites in the capital, Bangkok. Officials say 1 police officer was killed and several more seriously injured by a grenade, apparently thrown by protesters. Police also claim they were targeted by snipers. Police officers also fired live rounds during the operation, which they say successfully reclaimed the first of 5 sites from protesters. Reports say 3 protesters have been killed by gunfire. The authorities are trying to retake official sites that have been blocked by demonstrators since protests against Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawat's government broke out in November last year. The Islamist militant group responsible for Sunday's bus bombing in northeastern Egypt that killed 4 people, including 3 Koreans, has warned all tourists to leave the Sinai Peninsula by Thursday or risk being subject to further attacks. In a statement posted on jihadist websites, the al-Qaeda-linked Ansar Beit alMaqdis, based in Sinai, also said one of its members successfully blew up the tourist bus heading towards Israel and then declared an economic war against the Egyptian government. Insurgency has intensified since the Egyptian military overthrew Islamist President Mohamed Morsi in July of last year. But the militants, who mostly targeted soldiers, until now at least, are now trying to batter Egypt's fragile economy by orchestrating attacks on tourists. Iran and 6 world powers have begun what they are calling substantive talks in pursuit of a final settlement on Tehran's disputed nuclear program. The meeting in Vienna is being attended by US Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs Wendy Sherman, Iran's foreign and deputy foreign ministers, as well as officials from Britain, China, France, Germany and Russia. Despite the apparent warming of ties between Washington and Tehran, both sides have been playing down expectations of a breakthrough, with a senior US official saying negotiations would be a complicated, difficult and lengthy process. Iran's supreme leader has also expressed pessimism. The talks that follow an interim deal reached in November last year are expected to last 2 or 3 days. Now, there's never a shortage of art to enjoy in the South Korean capital Seoul, and this week is no exception, from traditional and modern craft works to the private collection of a former American soldier who was stationed here during the Korean War. Our cultural correspondent Park Geunhye reports.
At Kotor Station 284 in central Seoul, a former train station turned art gallery, more than 360 pieces of traditional and modern Korean craft works by some 100 artists are now on display. They include traditional craft art pieces by late Korean masters, such as lacquerware inlaid with mother of pearl, as well as contemporary pieces like collaborative craft works that incorporate elements of light art and installation art.
Korea's craft arts have many sub-areas, from textiles and wood to metalworks. My work is based on intense sewing by hand, which is the groundwork of any textile craft.
The exhibition is free of charge and will be open through March 9th, except on Mondays. The highlights of a private Korean art collection are currently on display in Seoul, 1 month ahead of a Korean art sale scheduled for March at Christie's in New York. The auction will mostly focus on the collection of Robert Moore, one of the most well-known Western collectors of Korean art. He's in Korea this week to show about a dozen pieces from his 135-item collection. Since his first visit to Korea as a soldier in the 1950s, Moore started collecting antique Korean art pieces from porcelain jars to folding screens. He says it's the unique features of Korean art that have drawn him in.
Natural, spontaneous, and made to be used by everybody, including the court and the most humble people. They can be very good or they can be just ordinary things, but the very good things, as you see in this gallery, are special, and that's what attracted me, and that's why I've been devoted to it.
The Seoul preview will continue until Wednesday at Shin Se-min Gallery in central Seoul. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Now, with just 5 days remaining until the curtain comes down on the Sochi Winter Olympics, more and more attention is being drawn to the next Winter Games, which will take place in the Korean resort town of Pyeongchang. For fans wanting to learn more about the next host city, there is a special place at Olympic Park to get a preview. Our Olympics correspondent Song Ji-sun filed this report from Sochi.
The spirit of the Olympics is alive and well in Sochi. But just a few minutes after entering Olympic Park, you can also get a sense of what the 2018 Winter Games will be like.
The
the Pyeongchang House is just before the main competition venues at the Olympic Park. Athletes and sports fans can get a preview of what the Winter Olympics will look like at Korea's Alpine City less than 4 years from now. From learning about Pyeongchang's location on the Korean peninsula and experiencing Korean medicine to watching cultural performances every day, visitors can get a better idea of the host city and the nation of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. The venue is especially popular among Russians who are curious about the city that will take the reins in 4 years.
I think that it will be good Olympic Games and maybe better than now. I hope that I will be in these Olympic Games in Pyeongchang.
And it's not too early to think about Pyeongchang. Athletes who have already wrapped up their games at Sochi are now setting their sights on Pyeongchang, and so are their families.
We're parents of an athlete at these games, and I'm very, very impressed. I mean, obviously, they're quite ready for the Olympics. There's no question about that.
After hitting the 100,000 visitor mark on Saturday, Pyeongchang House is rising as a must-see spot among Olympic fans.
Over 15,000 visitors drop by at the Pyeongchang House a day, meaning 1 out of 5 people in Olympic Park drop by. They get surprisingly interested after viewing the exhibition. And more than 500 Russians have already requested that they'd love to volunteer at the 2018 Pyeongchang Games.
Visitor number 201,800 to the Pyeongchang House, or 2018 with 2 zeros on the end, will win a free flight to and from the Games if the winner wants to volunteer at the 2018 Games. 송지선, ARIRANG NEWS, Sochi.
And a Golden Wednesday to you all as we kick off our Sochi coverage with the latest gold medal finish by the South Korean women's short track team during the 3,000-meter relay final on Tuesday. Now, it might have taken 11 days for the first short track gold, but the wait made it sweeter. With the team consisting of Shim Se-min, Park Geunhye, Kim Ha-rang, and Cho Hae-ri in the finals, they overcame an illegal block from a Chinese skater with 2 laps left as Shim Se-min raced to the finish line to claim the gold medal, as they finished the race with a final time of 4 minutes, 9.49 seconds. Now, Kong Sang-jung, who raced in the place of Kim Ha-rang in the semifinals, joined them in the podium as well, as Korea claims their first relay gold in 8 years and their 5th in 7 Olympics so far. And now moving on to the men's 10,000-meter speed skating event, where Lee Seung-hoon went to the race trying to defend his title, but in the end, he fell just short. And just like the 5,000-meter event, fatigue hits the South Korean speed skater late in the race as he drops down to 4th place after coming in at a final time of 13 minutes, 11.68 seconds. And once again, the Netherlands proved to be the powerhouse in the sport as 3 Dutch skaters finished on the podium, including Jorrit Bergsma, who finished with a new Olympic record time of 12 minutes, 44.45 seconds for the gold, followed by Sven Kramer and Bob de Jong. And now today marks the 12th day since the competitions kicked off in the Sochi Winter Olympics. And on day 12, not just for the Korean fans, but for fans worldwide, they'll finally get to see Kim Ha-rang defend her title in the women's figure skating event. Now with the event kicking off at 7 p.m. Sochi time, fans in Korea might be up at midnight to catch Kim Ha-rang competing in the short program as she's set to go 5th in Group 3. And with Kim Ha-rang looking to add a 2nd consecutive gold medal in the event, fans will have to wait until 9:24 p.m. Sochi time or 2:24 a.m. Thursday morning Korea time. And finally, let's take a look at the current medal count after 11 days of competition at the Sochi Winter Games. Of course, taking a look here, we see that Germany is still on top with 8 gold medals, and Norway up there now with second with 7 gold medals, with Netherlands flying high with 6 gold medals. Now, Russia drops down to 5th after a day, and Korea moves up a few spots to 15th overall with 2 gold medals in Sochi. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
And that's all for now. Thanks ever so much for joining us. We'll be back at noon Korea time. In the meantime, you can always catch up with what's been happening on our very comprehensive website, which can be found at arirang.co.kr/news.